Hi, Kyle. It's good to have you
Hello, yeah,
back.
thanks for having me back.
People will remember your episode. It was a great episode. It flew off the shelves. It was China's ecological. What was it? China's ecological miracle. And people know Kyle. You might know his tweets, although he's been shadow banned. Obviously, you used to have these. You used to have these like killer threads,
I still do. I still do.
but I never see them. But you would have these huge threads that would go around. I don't see them at all. I never see your logo. I never because Kyle Train emoji is like is like a memorable name. So you see it in your timeout, and I used to see your stuff all the time. But anyways, that's fucking Elon's Twitter. But at the very least, we have bigger things to do here. We're celebrating the publication of your book.
Yes, thank you very
Congratulations.
much. Uh, in fact, I have a.
How do you feel?
I feel great. This is it. I got a number of author copies, and yeah, I guess we can tell people where they can get it after the show or in the comments or whatever. But you can go to ischinagood.org. That's just an easy link to remember. If you want to go to the publisher's page, you can also find it, Amazon or bookstores and all that, or from my Twitter page, which is at Kyle Train Emoji.
Yeah, we'll have all those links, but it must feel good. You wrote this book pretty quickly because when I interviewed you, you were writing it, but you didn't give me the impression that you were like writing it for 5 years. That you had recently kind of
This,
embarked.
I mean, at that time, I think it was mostly done. Like I had gotten the deal with Clarity Press by then, and we were just like in the process of revising and editing and all that. And the actual manuscript, like, it only took about 6 months, honestly. The
Woo, you're a machine, Kyle.
Thanks. I mean, it kind of wrote itself, I guess. I mean, I was just kind of stuck inside at the time and didn't have much to do. But like, yeah, the real hard part was, all the editing and everything that goes into that, and now the publicity, which I'm really not the best at, but I'm giving it a shot.
Well, the book is for people who aren't watching, who are listening. It's Why the World Needs China: Development, Environmentalism, Conflict Resolution, and Common Prosperity. And I was looking over it again today. I was remarking at the fact that like because it has like the word China in the title, my first assumption was like, oh, this is going to be like a textbook on Chinese socialism. And it is in some ways, it is a kind of overview, but it's in fact like it's actually a very broad and very ambitious study of the planet, really. Like you're trying to do a very broad, and it's a and I have to say, like, I have to congratulate you. You take a lot of very complicated, extremely like murky stuff, and you present it very straightforwardly and like simply, and you don't have a lot of you don't have a lot of like fluff to your paragraphs. You're very like business, and I was like, yeah, Kai, this is like your Twitter threads. No fat on any of this writing. No garbage. Like, and you work your way very methodically through like a global. Like it takes a lot of discipline to work through these subjects. I guess at the outset, I would say why like your opening, what is it, like 100 pages, the first quarter of the book, really more, over just about over 100 pages, is a kind of overview of what we used to call late capitalism, in the hokey Ernst Mandel Belgian like Marxist sort of term from like the 50s, I think. But now it's more. But you're using super imperialism as the framework. It's sort of the era. Of
Yeah, an issue with the term late capitalism, actually, because like as I point out in my book, like, capitalism is always evolving and getting more and more exploitative. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different names for it, but that is not really a big deal what you call it, I think. But yeah, like, the reason for that, I think, is mainly I wanted it to be easily understandable by someone of any level of political education who is coming at this book. So someone who's didn't necessarily know anything, like, would have the background and be able to see where I was coming from, and really, I think to understand China, the modern China, you need to understand the world, the context in which it exists, and like how its actions are constrained, and what it is its policies are reacting to or influenced by, and that's true of every country really, but China especially, because China is like the world's you know second greatest economic superpower. You could say that the greatest, depending on who you ask. But it's so consequential to the world that I think you really have to analyze it in this way.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess at the outset, can you explain what I mean, this is hard to compress, but for people who don't know the term super imperialism, it seems to at least encompass things that like they may have heard of already, like neoliberalism, late capitalism, as we already discussed. But also it describes it's not just the sort of name of like an era of capitalism, a temporal sort of bookmark or whatever, like bookends. That's like what labels do like this. But it describes a relationship of power between a single imperial entity, United States, and the rest of the world that it either controls directly or it antagonizes directly. And so this is, I would say in some ways it's like this is one of the most fundamentally dishonest things about American life. Like John Mearsheimer, who's one of the more honest, like American normie, you know, political scientists, says stuff like, "Oh, America is not an empire." And it's like, what are you talking about? It's the most advanced empire the world has ever seen.
Well, yeah, the greatest empire, and it's also the greatest propaganda machine, like to sell itself. I mean, the British Empire kind of did something similar, like back in the 19th century, they would build themselves as like, we're the most moral empire, right? Like we're the good guys. The other empires are the bad ones. So like the term super imperialism, there's also the term neo-imperialism, which is I think is also a pretty good term. I just kind of prefer super, just because like super is used, more often to describe this kind of, qualitative and quantitative increase in how the aspects of imperialism are expressed. And the idea is that this is sort of my attempt to put forth a theory of imperialism that is counter to some prevailing, often post-Marxist theories that sort of posit that imperialism is a cyclical phenomenon, right? Like you had the Spanish Empire, and then the Dutch and the English, and now it's America, and then eventually it'll be China or Russia or whoever takes the place of the U.S. and like we'll just keep going on and on forever. And I don't believe that's true. I think you can definitely trace as we progress to each stage of capitalism and imperialism, there are qualitative differences. And if you go back to World War I and World War II, like the fundamental characteristic of imperialism was that the empires were divided. They were all fighting each other. You had inter-imperialist conflict. But after the Soviet Union was created, things changed so fundamentally that the Western empires had to unite to oppose this new competing social order. And that gave rise to the 20th century and how that played out, and how all these empires sort of coalesced under the leadership of the United States. And then there's been all kinds of theory since Marx and Lenin and all that to describe this phenomenon, like from Kwame Nkrumah, his book Neocolonialism, various other theorists, some Marxists like Samir Amin. But then once you get to the 90s, the 1991, when the Soviet Union was destroyed, then the conditions changed fundamentally again. In fact, which is maybe not quite so well understood. This imperial alliance didn't dissolve. They didn't go back to fighting each other. They remained under the control of the U.S. And in fact, the various ways that I describe in chapter 2 of how they express or how they exploit other countries and how they exert control over them, those increased by an order of magnitude in most cases.
I guess in some ways the task of your book, I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, is that you have this initial problem of the the madness around China that is both historical in terms of Orientalism, that it inherits this, the Occidental madness about the Oriental that is so pervasive. That's like, it's like, over 1,000 years old, that we all know about, whatever. So you have that legacy of Orientalism, but you also have this added overlay of American geopolitical, let's say, panic that has really been a very belated panic, to the point where, like, the American empire thought they had solved their China problem as late as 2010. They really thought they had nipped this problem in the bud, and they had no clue like what was awaiting them.
Part of the reason I go through all this is just to demonstrate just like how powerful the U.S. is. Like the U.S. empire is the most powerful empire that's ever existed, and this is the opposition that China faces. And if you just look at one of these maps of like the U.S. foreign military bases in the Pacific, you can see that China's coast, China's only coast with the Pacific is almost completely encircled. They have bases in Korea and Japan and now in the Philippines, and U.S. warships are going through there all the time. And it would be a very intimidating position to be in if from China's perspective, which I think informs a lot of their policy and their caution and how they interact with the world, of course.
I guess so because I was thinking about how you have that panic that's been very belated, but then you also have this other thing of the the people that you would think would be most open to learning from China, to being in dialogue and some kind of like discourse, who would be just simply interested in China, would be very enthusiastic. These people are often sometimes the most hostile to Chinese socialism, which is to say Western Marxists. And the very idea of Western Marxism is they invented a whole framework of critique, a whole wing of them, just to keep them away from those Asians and from those Slavs in Russia. Like, it's madness. Like, this is the layers that you have to get through to like talk about anything, to have any a remotely sane conversation about China.
Yeah, I mean that's also part of why I structured my book as I did, because like when we're having these conversations, especially about China, a real sticking point is that no one can agree on the fundamentals, right? You kind of need to build a model to the world just to have a conversation. And I think this whole so-called Western left-wing criticism of China is I think in a very large part manufactured. It's there. Like this is kind of a tactic that the the U.S. government and press and the think tank ecosystem is employing now, because like we've gotten to a point. I mean, as I was saying, like empires they undergo like monopolization and concentration and become more exploitative and all this. And we reached a point where like it's really not possible to hide like all the bad shit that the empire is doing. I mean, we've seen this with Palestine. Like you go online and like you can see all these horrific videos of the violence that's happening. And the propaganda machine doesn't really have a handle on this. Like they can't really, like they've tried, of course, but they haven't really been able to turn public opinion their way. And this is it's just like things have gotten so barbaric, really, that they can't hide their own crimes, and they're not even trying, really. Their tactic instead is to deflect by like trying to convince us, like well-meaning left-wing people who see these atrocities and want to do something about it. Just try to convince them that something else that's even worse is happening in these enemy countries. and that way, like they can always bring this up and try to divide us and exactly, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is one of the China is has, and I feel this like because I know this from just being, like my involvement in talking about Iran over these years, is that the US and sort of Western imperialists in general use other parts of the world like capital O to as a screen to not just project their own crimes, but as like but also to like and in the hopes of pursuing their own dreams and policies and fantasies. So like Afghan women need saving is, therefore we need to bomb them. Like that they use that as like a projection stream, but also it's a diversion tactic, right? Of like looking away from the sort of sick, the sicknesses of your own society and your own crimes, right? And so like the very fact that the US kills millions of Muslims around like the huge swath of the planet from North Africa to Pakistan, that it displaces tens of millions more, that it destroys countries wholesale, and then it has the audacity to then mourn for a mythical genocide in Xinjiang, a place that probably Muslims live better than in the US in some respects, in terms of surveillance, in terms of state terrorism, like state bullying intervention, like the whole thing of like, oh, Chinese Muslims suffer. It's like that. Have you people ever, do you guys even know how many like spies infiltrate every single American mosque? How like every single Islamic association has like all kinds of informants working up and down, that like it's like insane. It's an insane, and like you can't you're not, and it's a way that it's one of the tools that they use to enforce a kind of code of silence around China. Because if you just examine, you do like a modicum of research, and you don't have to write a book out of it like you, but you do a modicum of research, and you discover that, wow, the accomplishments of this revolution, the accomplishments of Chinese society, and like this revolution and this country of like a billion people, like a vast chunk of the planet, like are so mind blowing that they went from being a vassal of like not just one like foreign power, but like five. Like they were divided between several foreign powers, and like now are one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, in terms of economic and industrial, like country in the world. And they did that in the lifetime of one, like in one lifetime. Like there are tens of millions of Chinese people who remember, yeah, like they remember the century of humiliation. Like they remember it probably. They were like 8 years old when it ended, because it only ended in 1949. Like you got to figure there are like tens of millions of 90-year-olds in China right now who remember that stuff. And like to think of that, I don't know, it's something that like to me personally, it helps me in my moments of despair around the planet, that like if Chinese people can come back from what they were under to over a century of which they went through, like not just like a few years of occupation, but it was like a century, to now what they are, like that to me is like, I don't know how you can't celebrate that.
Oh, I mean, it's like it shows that if this is possible in such a short time. I mean, for a country that's over a billion people, like it can't happen elsewhere in the world. Like we can like bring about like an equalization of development, within a few generations, probably. It is possible, like with the resources that we have as a global society and all that.
There's a lot of like the panic around China, like specifically in the last, like since like the rise of Xi Jinping specifically, but and like there's that, but there's also the general sort of layer of obfuscations. Can you like summarize some, at least, like what are some things that really stick out about it, that people might have never heard before, because they certainly don't hear about it, anything good about China in our press.
Well, I try to use our press as much as I can, actually, just because I know that people will be skeptical of other sources, and it's really I mean, the environmental angle, especially. I mean, we talked about this last time, but it's really difficult to um, piece together the narrative of it from Western reports, because they're always critical in some way, right? Like, even if they admit China is building the most electric vehicles of any country in the world, of the rest of the world combined, in fact. Yeah, but at what cost, right? So I mean, that's kind of what I try to do. I just tried to find all the admissions that they had made, and put them into a narrative, which I think is I'm able to do, because like this is actually reality, right? Like the propaganda, American propaganda, like, has to work so hard to suppress reality. And as like I'm sure like Chinese propaganda is actually kind of notoriously bad, but their job is so much easier, because they just have to sell the truth, but more or less. In fact, there's been a study somewhat recently of people's opinions of China, and like how much around the world, and how much U.S. propaganda affects it. And actually, it's not really that much. Like, especially if you live in a Belt and Road country, and like you see that infrastructure is coming from China that directly affects your life. In many in most cases, it's very positive and will improve their opinion. Sorry, I forgot your original question.
It was like let's come up with a few bullet points of like some of the accomplishments of the Chinese Communist Revolution, like the PRC. Like, if imagine like what if you could describe what the results of the PRC have been. This, like, what, 80-year-old experiment. How's my math?
Almost there. I think they had their 75th anniversary lately. Right. So environmentalism. I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest story. We've talked about that already, but I just want to mention this recent Financial Times article. I don't know if you've seen it. It said the title is like, we must not mistake China's success with green energy for the world's success, because the world is only very incrementally getting better, while China is getting exponentially better. I think the statistic was like, in 2023, China added almost 200 gigawatts of clean energy, and the rest of the world added 7 gigawatts, which just gives you an idea of the scale. So environmentalism, also, a major point that I try to go to some length to describe in my book is China's poverty reduction, and their emphasis on the rural poor. The peasantry, or the former peasants of China, of which there were hundreds of millions at the end of the 20th century, and to have them their lives be improved as much as they have. I have the income statistics in there, and it's really remarkable. Like, per capita household income has doubled in 20 years, or more than doubled. It's like gone up by a factor of 10 in some places, but it just keeps doubling, every decade or so. So like that's really huge. I think, especially because China is really the only place in the world where this is happening. I mean, generally, like, the living conditions and income and infrastructure and all that, like, there's no place that it's increasing faster than in China. Whereas in the West, like, these things are stagnant, and in some cases, like, conditions are getting worse. Like, life is getting worse for a lot of people, especially the very poor. And here in the U.S., like, homelessness is like an all-time high, as I'm sure you've also seen. So this ability to do this, I think it's really not given enough attention, because I'm sure that a lot of countries would like to do something like this. The rural population of the world is still huge, and many people live under this kind of poverty that China is eliminating so quickly. And really, the reason they can't do that is because their own resources are not their own. Like the U.S. government, or the U.S. investors, Western corporations, and all that, they own the natural resources. They own the banks of these peripheral countries. They have this incredible influence on their governments and all their social institutions. And it's like all this productive capacity, all this potential is being turned into profit that it just flows back to the West. Rather than being used on development as China does, and just the way that the Chinese system is structured, just to allow them to use their own resources for their own development is really remarkable. And I don't know if you've read anything by Samir Amin. I quote him a few times in my book. When he was writing about China about 20 years ago or so, he was quite pessimistic, actually, that China could solve this problem, and it has. I point this out, I think, in chapter 11, maybe. Like he estimated that the Chinese government wouldn't be able to provide jobs for all these unemployed peasants, basically, and they have they've reduced. They've urbanized the population to a surprising degree, and yeah. So the rural poverty reduction. I mean, there's plenty of things I could say about this. I could talk about in detail about the types of infrastructure or specific programs or something. But I'll keep going. Let's see. Also, the financial system, as I mentioned, like this is kind of a key reason why they were able to allocate resources in this way. And it's because the financial system of China is virtually entirely state-owned. All the biggest banks, China has the 4 largest banks in the world by asset value, and they're all state-owned. The government of China does not allow its capitalist class. I mean, this is also a big conversation. Socialism and capitalism in China, and to what degree it's either. But the government does not allow the capitalist class to develop into a financial oligarchy, as which is like one of the conditions of imperialism that Lenin identified 100 years ago. And this is like the process we're seeing in the West. Like things are increasingly financialized. The wealth is becoming more concentrated, and there's more monopolization. The Chinese government is able to arrest that development and keep those resources, from getting caught up in this financial con game, basically, and instead use them for development. So I think that is also kind of an understated aspect of China's success, their control of financial system. Let's see what else. Well, the Belt and Road, I guess their export of infrastructure is also a really important point, because not only is China been successful, but China is also through this export of infrastructure, they're helping the world develop, and this will make super imperialism or neo-imperialism or whatever one you call it more difficult to enforce in the long term, because the relationship between the core and periphery is based on keeping the price of labor artificially low in the poorest countries in the world, who produce the raw materials and the labor at the very bottom of the value chain. By keeping those prices low, and they continually enforce this inequality by coups and IMF restructuring and all that. The more developed your country is, the more opportunities you have, the more mobility that workers have, and so they'll be able to demand a higher price and eventually get out of this trap. So we hope.
I guess in some ways, part of the problem of understanding China's position in the world capitalist market is that, to our eyes, I'm saying this this is just a sort of stereotypical view of your typical anti-capitalist in the West. They see people working, wage labor jobs in a factory. They see people working, they see extractivism. They see large fishing fleets. China is an industrial. It's like a high tech industrial country. It's not just the workshop of the world, but it also requires a whole host of industries to feed its own people, which of course require inputs from other parts of the world. So they have their own supply chain. So it's part of the issue of talking about China is that the scale of the country itself, to think about, not only did they rapidly modernize the country from a state of almost basically quasi-feudal, or if not feudal, full feudal relations as late as 1949. Tibet was a feudal, like landlord owned, like province. Like it was owned by like the monks. And like people are like, the joke is like, oh, free Tibet is like, like, Mao already did. Like there were slaves in Tibet because, and there aren't slaves anymore because of the communist revolution. So like, but here in the West, you hear about, oh, Tibet is bad, like Tibet is evil, or no, I mean, like what they do in Tibet is evil. Like it's like it's a whole upside down world. But I guess what I meant to, before I got sidetracked, what I meant to say was that you have this problem of the like understanding like Chinese like history, politics, the regionalisms, the difference between, like these region and that region requires a deep amount of reading, relatively speaking, right? Like the foreignness of China for your average Western, like provincial person really alienates them. And I would, or at least in some ways, not alienates, but intimidates them. And I would say that that's a huge like burden for people to like sort of break through in terms of breaking through this kind of like propaganda war that is sort of like almost firewall that surrounds like having a normal conversation about China that isn't like frothing at the mouth, like neocon
Yeah, I mean,
talking about.
it's difficult precisely because of what you said. Like China was basically forced to integrate into the capitalist world system, and this creates a lot of contradictions and things that seem superficially similar. Like as you said, like wage labor in China and the U.S. And of course, like there are plenty of people in China who have it kind of rough and really have to scramble to survive. And sort of explaining why that is. I mean, it kind of takes some doing, but if you look at it in context, like the plan for China's development, the plan of the Communist Party was, as they said, literally, like we let some regions get rich first for the purposes of achieving common prosperity faster. And like this is sort of the logic behind the 80s and 90s and the capitalist development in China. Which for because I write about the Western regions. I put a lot of attention on them in the book, and like they're specifically like while in the 90s wealth was like these regions were getting richer. The East was getting richer faster, right? So I think during the 90s, the income in the East or in the West doubled, which is huge, more than anywhere in the world, really. But in the East, like the coastal regions, it tripled. So their gap with the average was increasing at that time. And what is kind of remarkable about the latest stage of China's development, the Xi Jinping period basically corresponds to this, which I call it, the common prosperity era, because that's the major initiative that they the title of the initiative of redistribution that they've embarked on. This really just signifies that this stage of development that they had originally planned, in the late 70s and the 80s, has reached a point where they've gotten rich, and so now they're trying to spread the wealth around and raise up everyone that they couldn't before. And like this is actually happening. Like if you examine the data, like that gap is narrowing. And really nowhere else in the world can you really see this. I mean, in some places, like, Vietnam also, for example. But nearly everywhere in the world where, there are these disparities, urban, rural, for example, also ethnic disparities and all this, it's either getting worse or stagnant nearly everywhere. As I explain in how it is in the U.S., but also elsewhere in the West, and also in many places in the periphery, because of this like totalizing system.
I guess in some ways that this book, because I figure you and I are probably around the same age, and so we're children of neoliberalism. And we were raised in this triumphalism of the US won the Cold War, right? Like this was, and what's interesting is that winning the Cold War meant vanquishing their erstwhile enemies, right? Occupying them directly, in the form of like the expansion of NATO, even though they promised that they wouldn't. But then also on top of that, like basically establishing all these zones of control. So like all those Baltic countries are just American sub colonies now. Their politicians are controlled by the U.S. They all align with NATO. Same for most of what was used to be the Eastern Bloc. Ukraine was always like kind of like the split one, and we all know what happened there. So like part of part of our lives has been interesting because we watched American power really reach its peak, as you say in the book. Like the 2000s were this golden moment for like Pax Americana. Maybe like not. I guess it depends on how you draw the line, but basically around the time that we're teenagers and we're beginning to sort of see the world for what it is, what we see is American power unrivaled. And yet at the same time, like against the backdrop of all this, China's liberalization is unfolding, right? But it's unfolding in a kind of ugly manner in some ways, right? Like that's the famous era of so-called sweatshops. Like that's the like of like you had a super amount of rich people. Yeah, like you had a huge like this was a like the story of like how we got to here, if like contemporary China and it's like various like economic and so like indicators, social indicators, successes is itself quite remarkable because it wasn't looking good in like the 2000s. It was looking like they were heading towards the same fate that other countries. I mean, Russia, I didn't know this stat, but I guess I knew it in the back, but I didn't realize it. You say like Russia had it drop, you had the life expectancy drop of 6 years, like the single biggest drop of all
According
time.
to a study, I think it made it in there. Like 7 million people died during the '90s in Eastern Europe. The transition that they wouldn't have otherwise.
This this is like I guess I found the quote. The subsequent economic crash led to the massive increase in poverty and a 6-year drop in Russian life expectancy, the greatest drop recorded anywhere in history in the absence of war or natural disasters, according to a study of Berlin-based Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute. I mean, like the very fact that this is like how the U.S. runs the world. If you like try to rival it, it will smash you, and it will make you into like one of its dependent states if it can. And so the very fact that China was able to emerge from this like super imperial context itself is accomplishment. Like Chinese sovereignty is real, and they had to fight for it. I mean, American, what was it? Who was the American general? Patton. He wanted to nuke
I
China
think it was
when they were
MacArthur.
fighting in
Uh,
Korea.
maybe Patton too.
MacArthur, not Patton. Yeah, yeah, no, it was MacArthur. Yeah, he was. They wanted to nuke it. They were going to nuke
Yeah,
China because they were mad about losing in
it's
Korea.
remarkable how close we've gotten to something like that in history. Um, yeah, I think as you mentioned, like it's not really just standing up to the U.S. because, like, in the chapter we were talking about just before this, like it really wasn't Russia of the '90s. Like they embraced capitalism completely, and they wanted to join the West, right? They wanted to get into this imperial club, and they couldn't really because like all this misery that the collapse of the socialist bloc caused, like that corresponded to like a great increase in wealth absorbed by the United States. Like there's this amazing statistic, I have it there, I think in chapter 6, where during the period from I think it's 1996 to 2001, global GDP, like the entirety of global GDP increase was absorbed by the United States. So like if you take the net GDP increase, the U.S. increase was greater. So like it really shows like the ability to invite certain countries that were formerly part of that bloc into this NATO and as you mentioned and like this imperial sphere, like it could really only be accomplished then, because that's when there was such an influx of wealth. And now, like that's really not going to go. Like the club, like as I explained, like the club must grow more exclusive, which means even though like Russia embraced capitalism, like they had to destroy Russia. They had to balkanize it again. They wanted to break it up, and really like any rival, any potential rival, like any country that's large enough that is too large to invite into this club, like has to be destroyed. It has to be a victim instead. So like I think that kind of explains a lot of U.S. policy. Like if you're capitalist or socialist, like they will still target you. And it's impressive, and I think it's not really a foregone conclusion that China was able to escape this fate. Like I think it really could have gone either way. And in fact, like the Deng era strategy of this um, uh, strategy for development, like it was very risky. It certainly could have gone that way for China. Thankfully it didn't, and they had this tremendous success to see, but it definitely was a risk.
Is Xi Jinping the reason why it didn't go that way? Is it fair to say that at this point, or is that too
I don't
exaggerated?
give Xi himself a whole lot of credit, just because I'm a very big opponent of the great man theory of history. And like Xi, I think I mean you've probably read a bit about Xi's background and how he was one of the sent down youth of the Cultural Revolution. He had to go live in a rural village. So I think that Xi is definitely the man for the job. Like if for this to oversee this stage of development in China, where the rural communities are prioritized in this way. But like also, I think like we should really just see Xi as the figurehead of the party. Like the party put him there. That's who they want to be in charge. And the party is 100 million party members in China, and they they represent the working class and peasants of China. And so it's really an expression of their will. And as I described, in the chapter about this, chapter 7, I identify like this shift began actually before Xi even became general secretary. It happened around the time of the great financial crisis of 2008, when China decided to respond to this not by more austerity and neoliberalism, but by increased public spending and increased credit to the public sector. That's also about the time that they started building the high-speed rail network, which is larger than the rest of the world's high-speed rail length combined. So really, like I think that the party should get the credit, and really like in the grand scheme of things, like individuals are really they're not unimportant, but like they're definitely not the be all end all. And I think whoever replaces Xi is probably just going to continue this process. Like it seems that the party is pretty solidly in line and knows what they're doing.
It's so hard for us to imagine um, like the the accomplishments. I mean, this kind of relates to what I said before, but the accomplishments of the PRC and the Chinese Revolution in general, like Communist Revolution in general, to think about. First of all, imagine if there was any party here that had 50 million members, let alone 100 million, right? Like that would be a level of political alignment that has
Does either
never
party in the
existed.
U.S. even get that many
That
votes?
that Yeah, no, like it would be. I mean, of course, fine. Like, yeah, the population of China is 4 times what it is in the U.S. more. So, like, you can't like you have to think about that. But the very fact that 100 million people who are then dispersed throughout the country and interact in really, I mean, maybe we can go into that. What we can only describe as really democratic relationships with the towns and villages that they related. And so, like this is part of what like drives me mad and makes me pull out my hair. It's like if they were so unhappy, Mr. Western Orientalist man, like if Chinese people were so unhappy with this with this state of theirs. If they were, so why wouldn't they do something about it? Why wouldn't they have already overthrown it? They've done it before. Like they've clearly done it before. They can do it. They have the numbers. If they were as bad as you're describing, it's like this is like the logical thing of like, how do you figure like if you think it's so bad there, like why isn't it why haven't they done anything about them themselves? And they can never answer that because ultimately they have this cartoonish image of China in their head, whereas in reality, the things that happen in China, like I'll delete all this. Don't worry. Like the things that happen in China, like the West would envy the accomplishments of the Chinese Communist Party in terms of like number of people, in terms of what it does, in terms of how it stitches together a country of over a billion people into like a coherent, like national entity. I mean, these are all monumental achievements of political science and bureaucracy, and you just dismissed it here. Oh, it's just authoritarianism. It's just Stalinism. It's just the tyranny of what did this fucking Naomi Klein say in this tweet? What did she say? Oh my god, this is such a racist. I have to pull it up. I'm sorry. I just quoted it this morning. I had forgotten about it, but like this is the typical Western attitude. It was actually Esha, a friend of the show, historically, the editor of Historically. Uh, she challenged her, and Naomi Klein did this like racist response. Here, I'll share it now, if I can find it. Um, Hold on. Sorry, I'll edit all this out. No one will see this. It's just so racist. Like, look at this shit, man. Like, oh, it's coming. Sorry. I will. It's just taking forever. I'll share it on the screen. It's because I'm uploading this one. Oh my god, look at this fucking. Oh my god, just a vile hamster. These people. This is Naomi Klein, our wunderkind leftist radical. This is in response to Esha. Can I ask you to read it? If you are pressed, stick to chapter 9, slamming the door in history, a crisis in Poland, a massacre in China. Oh, you didn't see it? Stop. Okay, you didn't see it. It's about how I'll put it in. Oh, okay. It's about how capitalist forces in China colluded with the West to crush pro-democracy movements and create market Stalinism. That doesn't mean anything. If techno, this is the fucking crazy thing. If techno dystopian sweatshop to the world is your idea of socialism, man, we are more screwed than I thought. Thinking people, do not leave this to the right. Naomi Klein, you are a racist, imperialist, Zionist shithead. Go fuck yourself, Naomi Klein. Fuck off.
Um, well, so I want to go back to the beginning there and agree. Like, I think the Communist Party of China is a lot more democratic actually than any really any Western so-called democratic system, especially the United States. I mean, to be in the Communist Party is a huge responsibility. If you fuck up, like you will be kicked out very quickly, and like it's seen as a responsibility. I mean, I've seen some Chinese folks say that like I don't consider myself a communist because I'm not in the party, and like to be a communist is like this responsibility to the people. So, like, I think if you really examine the system, and of course within the party, like there's the Congress and it's really like a representative democracy, and it comes up to the central committee and Politburo and eventually Xi, like they are elected, by the party. And secondly, like I think So in the book, I mentioned that I have kind of a dim view of anecdotal evidence, but I just want to give my own anecdote of being in Shanghai at night on a weekend, where there's this gigantic, tourist attraction to see the Bund, the little bend in the river where you see the buildings light up and all that. And there's just so many people there. It gave me the impression of being in one of those big marches in U.S. cities that we've seen the last several years, and it really like impressed upon me. It's kind of in a personal way, if the government was really the enemy of the people, like they would not have put them all in these huge cities. like, because you can't really control a group of people that is that massive, right? Like that many people, they will do whatever they want, and I think that itself is really is evidence that they want the party to be in charge.
I guess in some ways, like there is another issue here at the stake is that like the levels of ignorance around China make it so hard to dispel any of this stuff that if you like rationally explain to people, like if you say to people that yeah, the Chinese Communist Party has way more democracy involved in its daily day-to-day functioning than any party in the West, they'll look at you and think you're crazy. They think you're from Mars. Like you've said something too
Well, what
much.
really
And
frustrates me, like this is, it's kind of hard to get it through to people, especially as other Westerners, with whom I have these conversations the most, is that like you see problems in China, of which there are many. Like, of course, like I have no trouble admitting that. Like, if you try to imagine the solution, like the only solution that they can think of is to overthrow the government, right? This is this kind of a programmed response, like okay, well we've got to get rid of this awful authoritarian government, when really that would be the absolute worst thing for China. Um, and it really I mean, this is kind of understandable because our own government is so awful and like will not do a thing for us, despite going out and protesting for Palestine, all across the country. Like what happened? Like the government is just giving more money and bombs to the perpetrators, and they can't even get like these college campuses to divest from bomb manufacturers. Like, why are they even investing in bomb manufacturing in the first place? Like, it's so ridiculous. But like the idea that the government could be the best way to solve the problem is kind of alien to us. But in China, it makes perfect sense, and really like that is what is happening.
so maybe this is I should have said this in the early part, but why does the world need China, Kyle?
I mean, first of all, I would just reemphasize the environmental angle. Like it would be impossible for the world to undergo the green energy transition that it is doing now without China. 80% of all solar panels are manufactured in China. I don't know if you've seen the graph of like the exponential increase in solar power or solar capacity, and it's a completely exponential curve. Like starting around 2022, and like there's a graph that displays it like over top all these estimates, and they all estimated that it would either decrease or just continue very slowly, and they were all wrong because of China, right? So like it really would not be possible, without China doing this, and the fact that they can do it with just the fraction of the world's resources that they have at their disposal is really really incredible, and like it shows. I think it kind of shows that the rest of the world could accomplish so much if it could do something similar, if it was able to do something similar. And secondly, I mean, this requires kind of all the imperialist theory there of imperialism and Lenin to Samir Amin and world systems theory to explain how the global economy is currently structured, and how China's export of infrastructure is working to realign these disparities. So yeah, I don't know. Like I've kind of already gone into that a bit, but that's really the second major reason. And then also there is the diplomatic angle, right? Like China is hewn pretty closely to its policy of non-interference in other countries' affairs. They haven't been in an armed conflict in like 40 years, I think it is now. Like my whole lifetime, certainly. And now increasingly they're playing a role of peacemaker and mediator, especially in the last 20 years, which is really, what the world needs. Like, unfortunately, like as imperialism, grows more monopolized and, more savage, right? Like we're starting to see more wars and violence to like maintain this level of extraction, which is now threatened. So like having the one of the world's major superpowers, as a force for peace and reconciliation is really important as well.
I mean, there's so much to say, but I guess I've said this before on this show. I don't know how it comes off to people, but I feel like in some strange cosmic alignment that it took the Chinese of this in the second half of the 20th century to start at least, and it took them a few decades, but essentially they fulfilled the promise of liberalism. Like you,
Well, yeah, they did what neoliberalism says it wants to do. They actually did.
yes, yes, they did it, and they did it in a way that they then exported it to the world. Like it's as if like the communist, it took a communist country to live out the script of enlightenment liberalism. Like that's to me a weird, strange, like what enlightenment and liberalism imagined itself could be is actually what Chinese socialism has accomplished and is now exporting to the rest of the world in the way, but and they're not like exporting their own system. They're just creating an alternate world that you can either live with the mafia guy Uncle Sam, and live under his thumb, or you can come and join us in our world of trade and like trains going really fast.
They're creating
Like which one is it?
conditions for like others to replicate their success. I mean, there's more to that equation. I mean, as we're seeing, like there's still national liberation movements that are struggling tremendously to reach that level of freedom. So like it's really of course, like there's only so much China can do. Also, as I explained, like there are definitely historical reasons for their relative timidity in global affairs, and being surrounded by U.S. military bases, I think is a major factor as well. But yeah, it is definitely a big question of how other countries can reach this level of independence from the United States. And infrastructure and trade like are a big factor, but they're not the only factor, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's no like, and especially too, like, I think this is something. I mean, I think you say this in the book somewhere. Like, there is a tendency to extrapolate our own worldview and like, oh, we've only known U.S. empire and like Western imperialism. That's all we've ever known. So, like, if that's the only world we've ever seen, all we can assume that that's the world that China will create, right? That it inherits. It's this like imperial relay race, and China is now getting handed the baton. But like, really, it's not like the U.S. is not in the same world system as China now. Like it's strange. The Chinese are the foundation stone of the U.S. world system in a way, just in terms of them being like the global workshop, and the U.S. couldn't even shovel food into its mouth without the spoons provided to like China by China. But at the same time, it not only is like the foundation stone of like the US imperial world system, but then it's also created its own, not world system, I would say, but another kind
Well,
of.
you can have more than one world system, right? Like it's by definition the entire thing. So like in order to get to a socialist world system, we have to undermine the existing one. Which kind of explains a lot to this sort of dialectical position that China is in. I mean, really, I think this is a major lesson of the Cold War, and it's the reason for world systems theory and a lot of these post-Marxist ideas, where it sort of became apparent that despite having these revolutions, in Soviet Union and Vietnam and so forth, like these countries like were still compelled to be part of the world system. Like they still had to integrate to some degree. I mean, even before China's strategy for development, the Soviet Union, the socialist bloc, like was still integrated. Like you cannot escape it, right? Um, like getting to that point where there's like a fundamental realignment in the position of the countries of the world, and especially in such a way, like as I explained, like I really object to the cyclical theories of imperialism, which world system theory in its original conception was one. And I think like to break this cycle, like we need new theory to describe phenomenon, and to figure out, what is the path forward.
Kyle, thank you very much. I kept you for over an hour. Congratulations on this book. I hope it feels good. What are you working on next? Are you
Thank
just
you.
doing the next thing now? Or are you going to take some
Well,
time
I mean,
off?
I'm kind of focused on promotion at this point. I've written a couple articles that will come out at some point soon. One of them should appear in Monthly Review in a few months, I think, depending on how quick the process is. And I think a couple others will also show up before the end of the year. And I guess maybe I'll try this, video essay format that you recommend. Um, yeah, like after that, I'm really not sure. I mean, I'd really like to start working on something else, because this it gets a little old to be constantly tweeting about this one book, but I got to do it. So here I am.
Cool, man. I really appreciate your time. Sorry for all the delays on this episode.
Oh, no worries. I am just happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me back.